My name is Chloe. Today is my 23rd birthday, and it's been precisely 5 years since I left my childhood home with just $83, a trash bag, and a precious photo album. I'm now a community health worker at the Kentucky Family Health Alliance, focusing on a program called Family Reconnection. My role involves finding the elderly who've been isolated or forgotten by their families and opening the door for them to reconnect. In the past 3 years, I've worked with 68 families, a number that my grandmother would have surely found amusing. But let me take you back in time, to the events that led me to this point. I grew up in a seemingly idyllic neighborhood in Lexington, a place where the houses were well kept, and the families appeared to follow a certain order. Our family home on Elmwood Drive had a large porch with a swing, and we had a tradition of sending out over 300 Christmas cards every December. My father, Henry, was a well-respected accountant at a local firm. He was tall and had this way of making people laugh during conversations, but there was always a bit of distance when it came to me. My mother, Valerie, was a high school teacher who retired early to focus on the family. Then there was my older sister, Sophie, who was 10 years my senior. Sophie always seemed to have everything figured out. She went to an Ivy League college, and my parents spared no expense for her education and social life. Whenever I asked about my own college future, my mother would simply say, "Chloe, you're so self-sufficient. You'll manage on your own." The only one who treated me differently was my grandmother, Maud. She was born in 1932 in Carter County. She had taught at Greenfield Elementary for 40 years. I lost my grandfather, George, to a heart attack when I was 8. From then on, Maud became my rock. Every weekend, my father would drive me to her small cottage on Pine Street. She'd make the most delicious apple pies from scratch, using apples from the old tree in her backyard. She also had a beautiful leather-bound photo album, where she'd add a picture of us every time I visited and write a little note underneath. One of the notes, written under a photo of us at my grandfather's grave, said, "I promised him I'd never let my granddaughter face the same hardships as I did." I was too young to understand it at that time, so I never asked. When I was 14, my parents told me I had to go stay with my aunt in Bowling Green for 2 weeks while Sophie prepared for an important internship interview. I didn't want to go, but my mother insisted it would be good for me. In the middle of that second week, my mother called, sobbing. She said Maud had passed away in her sleep, and the funeral had already been held because she didn't want me to see her sick. When I got home, the cottage on Pine Street was already sold. My mother said the money was used for Maud's final medical expenses, but no one ever explained what those expenses were. For the next 4 years, I didn't ask any questions. I didn't want to lose the family I had, even though I always felt like an outsider. Then, on my 18th birthday, a Saturday in June 2020, the world as I knew it shattered. I woke up early, and the house was eerily quiet. I could sense that this birthday wasn't going to be a celebration. When I went downstairs, my mother was in the kitchen, making pancakes. She barely glanced at me and said there was cereal in the pantry. There was a notepad on the counter with a name, Mr. Thompson, and a phone number scribbled under it. I didn't ask about it. Sophie came down later, dressed in a designer outfit I'd never seen before. My mother had a freshly brewed coffee ready for her, and she gave Sophie this warm smile that I hadn't received in a long time. My father was out, and my mother said he was running errands. Around mid-afternoon, I sent a text to Rita, who owned a small diner in town where I'd been working part-time. I asked if we could talk. She didn't reply immediately. At 6 p.m., my mother knocked on my door and told me to wear a nice dress because there was a party. I put on the dress and went downstairs. The table was set with a store-bought cake from Walmart, a vase of daisies, a few balloons with the number 18 on them, and a plate of fried chicken. My father came in, gave me a quick hug, and said, "Happy birthday, kid." At 8:30, my father stood up and said, "We have a special surprise for someone who really deserves it this year." He held out his hand to Sophie, and she followed him outside. My mother put her hand on my shoulder and told me to stay. Through the window, I saw a brand new BMW parked in the driveway with a huge red bow on it. Sophie was screaming with joy, "Oh my God, Dad! This is exactly what I wanted." Then my mother turned to me. She was holding a black trash bag. She walked towards me and said, "Chloe, you're no longer part of this family. You've always been a burden. Don't make a scene." I forced a smile. I smiled through the balloons, through my father's cold eyes, and through Sophie's triumphant laughter. I went upstairs, packed a few changes of clothes, my toothbrush, my important documents, the unopened birthday envelope from last year which had $50 in it, and the photo album Maud had given me. When I came back down, my father gave me $33 from his wallet without looking at me. I walked out of the front door. Sophie was too busy taking pictures of herself with the car keys to even notice me leaving. At the end of the block, my phone buzzed. Rita had replied, "Where are you? Can you come to the diner now?" I started walking. It was a warm summer night, and the air felt heavy. I stopped at a convenience store along the way and sat on the curb. I counted the money in my pocket, $83 in total. I opened the photo album for the first time in years. On one of the pages, there was a photo of me at 8, sitting on Maud's lap. Underneath the photo, she had written, "My dear Chloe, I'll always be here for you." I felt a lump in my throat. As I was looking at the album, I felt something hard in the trash bag. I pulled out a bundle of manila envelopes tied with a blue rubber band. On the top envelope, in my mother's handwriting, it said, "Maud's estate documents, do not discard." I realized then that everything that had happened that day, all the conversations, were just an act. I put the envelopes back and continued walking to the diner. Rita met me at the door. She was an older woman, in her late 60s, a widow from Italy. She saw the trash bag but didn't ask any questions. She led me to a back room and brought me a bowl of soup. After I finished eating, she asked if I had anywhere to go. I shook my head. She then gave me a key to a small room behind the kitchen and said, "You can stay here for now. In the morning, help me with the dishes, and I'll feed you." That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened the album again. On the last page, Maud had written, "This is for you to fill when you understand." I took a pen and wrote the date, June 15th, 2020, and underneath it, "She's not dead. I have to find out." Over the next few days, I started to uncover some strange things. On the second day, I looked at the estate documents in the daylight. The so-called death certificate my parents had shown me was just a form from a local funeral home, not an official state document. It had no state seal. On the sixth day, I received a call from a woman at a life insurance company. She said that as of my 18th birthday, I was now eligible to be directly informed about a policy for which I was the primary beneficiary. My father worked at the same insurance company, which meant he had known about it but had kept it from me. This made me suspicious that Maud was not dead. On the 8th day, no one from my family had called. I started to accept that they really meant to get rid of me. But on the 10th day, my father left a voicemail. "Chloe, please come home. We made a mistake. We love you." But I knew there was more to it. On the 12th day, I logged into my old Facebook account for the first time since I left home. There was a photo tag from a woman named Elise. In the photo, Maud was sitting in a chair in a room I'd never seen. She was wearing a purple sweater that she bought for me on my 13th birthday. Behind her, there was a sign that said, "Happy 88th birthday, Maud. Your Chloe is coming soon." I stared at the screen in disbelief. The sweater was the one she'd said she wanted to wear the last time she saw me clearly. I walked downstairs and showed the phone to Rita. She just looked at me and said, "Chloe, you need to make a decision tonight." The next day, my father called again. He was crying, really crying. He said he was sorry and that they wanted me back home. But then he mentioned a small appointment at Mr. Thompson's office on Main Street. He said it would only take a few minutes, and if I signed one form, everything would go back to normal. I hung up the phone and did some research about Mr. Thompson's office. I found out that he specialized in elder law and estate planning, and there was a Medicaid waiver program called Consumer Directed Options. Family members could get paid to care for elderly relatives, but everyone over 18 in the family had to sign an acknowledgement form annually, or it could be flagged for fraud. I realized that my father wanted me to cover up the fact that someone in the family had been receiving caregiver stipends for a supposedly deceased Maud. The only person it could be was Sophie. The deadline for my signature was approaching fast. I had until June 30th to sign, or the state would audit the program and discover the truth. Rita gave me her car keys and told me to go wherever I needed to go. That night, I drove the 50 miles south to a small town where I knew Maud was staying in a nursing home. I didn't go to the nursing home right away. I stopped at a 24-hour diner, sat in a booth, and called Elise. She answered sleepily and told me to come to the nursing home at 7:15 a.m. The next morning through a side door. I arrived at the nursing home early the next day. Elise was there. She looked at me and said, "Oh, you look so much like her." She led me down a long hallway to a room. When I opened the door, there was Maud, sitting in a chair, folding a paper napkin. She looked up at me, and for a moment, her face lit up. "Chloe, my dear. I've been waiting for you." But then, a cloud seemed to pass over her eyes, and she looked at me like a stranger. Elise explained that it was the dementia. She said Maud knew me in her heart but could only hold on to the memory for a short time. I sat on the floor of the room and watched Maud. On the dresser, there were 2 pictures of me, and nothing of my parents or Sophie. Elise told me that Maud looked at those pictures every day and said I was coming to visit. She also showed me a shoebox in the bottom drawer of the dresser. Inside were 70 letters, all addressed to my parents' house on Elmwood Drive but never mailed. I started reading the letters. The first few were written in clear, strong handwriting. Maud was angry and scared, describing how my parents had mistreated her and how they were trying to take her assets. Each letter ended with, "Find me, Chloe. Don't stop." As I continued reading, I discovered a pattern of family abuse that had spanned 3 generations. Maud had watched her mother-in-law be thrown out of the family farm when she was old, and now, it was happening to her. She had tried to protect me, but she felt like she had failed. One letter led me to a clue at the local church. Maud had hidden an envelope in the church library, between the Old and New Testaments of a Bible with a brown leather cover. At the church, the pastor told me the story. Maud had given him the Bible in 2012 and asked him to keep it in the library if no one from the family asked about it within 90 days of her death. And if I ever came asking, he was to give it to me. Inside the envelope, I found a list of Maud's assets, including a house worth $300,000, 2 certificates of deposit worth $15,000, a life insurance policy worth $60,000, and a power of attorney. With the help of a lawyer Maud had trusted, I was able to gain access to the accounts and get official physician letters to activate the power of attorney. I also discovered that Sophie had been enrolled as Maud's caregiver through the Medicaid program since 2017. She had signed Maud's name on the annual forms and had transferred $25,000 from a Medicaid holding account to her own account. She had used that money as a down payment for the BMW. I confronted Sophie at a coffee shop. I showed her the evidence, the visitor logs, the bank records, and the CDO forms. She tried to justify it, saying that our parents had told her Maud was already gone and that signing the papers was the right thing to do. But I knew the truth. She had taken advantage of a vulnerable old woman. I reported the case to Adult Protective Services. After an 85-day investigation, the findings were clear: financial exploitation and isolation of a vulnerable adult. Sophie was ordered to repay $25,000 over 36 months, and my parents and Sophie were placed on the Kentucky Elder Abuse Registry for 10 years. My mother lost her consulting jobs, and Sophie lost her car when she couldn't make the payments. My father was demoted at work. It was never my intention to break up the family, but I couldn't let the abuse continue. I moved Maud to a new nursing home, a place where she was treated with kindness and respect. She had a few lucid moments over the next year. In one of them, she looked at me and said, "Chloe, you're the one who opened the door." On April 20th, 2021, Maud passed away peacefully in her sleep. I was by her side. I called the people who had been there for me during this difficult time Rita, Elise, and the pastor. I removed the false memorial marker from the cemetery and placed a new one with Maud's real dates. Now, as I look back on these past 5 years, I'm reminded of the strength of Maud's love and the importance of standing up for what's right. I carry the shoebox of letters with me as a reminder of the power of truth and the hope that even in the darkest of times, there is always a way to reconnect with those we love. And as I head to visit Mrs. Enders at Stay Cecilia, I know that the people no one visits still hear the door open, and sometimes, all they need is someone to be that door.